Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Well, we're joined now in the studio by the Environment Minister, George Eustice. Thank you for being with us.
It's a pleasure.
Now, the Prime Minister, it seems, is coming under increasing pressure about this 1% pay cap for public sector workers. Do you personally think it's time for that to be dropped?
Well, I think the right thing to do is to let those public sector pay review bodies do their work. They're going to report to us later this summer, and then we'll respond to that. And the right time to look at this is perhaps, around the time of the budget, having considered what those review bodies say. And
so do you think you should accept, then, what the pay review bodies say?
Well, generally, yes, and we generally would, and we would respond to them, but you do so on a sector-by-sector basis. The arguments can be different for each sector, but we have to basically wait for that process to take place first, and the right time to consider this is after they've reported, not do some knee-jerk reaction before. So we also have to recognise, I think, though, the reason we've got this 1% pay restraint. We have made big progress in reducing the size of the deficit. It was 10% of our GDP at £152 billion when we came to power in 2010. We've now got that down significantly. We've cut it by 75%. So the reason we have public sector pay restraint and restraints in the public sector generally is to try to balance the books. And we're still spending more each year than we're bringing in tax revenue. There's still a little bit further to go to balance those books, which we hope to do in the middle of the next decade.
But is it time to loosen some of that belt tightening that's been happening? Because people are struggling. It was a very loud message at the election where the Conservative Party lost seats. Is it not now time to listen and to start easing up? Well,
and we've said we are going to listen. We are listening. We do recognise, and I came across this on the doorstep, as did many other MPs, some people, nurses who've shown, that they've been working for many years and they've been having sort of 1% a year, but they don't feel it's enough, and a frustration that this has been quite a long slog. And I think everyone recognises, Philip Hammond recognises it feels like it's been quite a long slog getting this huge deficit that we inherited under control. But equally, we don't want to sort of throw away what we've achieved. We do have to live within our means. We do need to balance the books. If you just, allowed a bit of a free-for-all and really loosened the spending on public sector pay, it's quite an expensive undertaking. It does put huge pressure on your public finances. And for instance, you might find yourself in a position of having to, have redundancies in the public sector because the NHS and schools can't afford the pay they're being asked to deliver.
Another area where Jeremy Corbyn has got a lot of support is this idea that tuition fees should be scrapped. Now, Damien Green, who perhaps is, Theresa May's #2, if you like, has said there should be a national debate on this. What's your view on tuition fees?
Well, I think he said there should be a national debate. I think that's very different from saying he's sympathetic to the point that Jeremy Corbyn was making.
But he's opened the door, hasn't he, to there being some kind of change?
I think he's saying there should be a debate because clearly this was, an element in the election, and it's a debate that we've got to win if we believe we should keep going with the tuition fees. And I do think we should. And the reason is this. In my constituency, there will be people who will leave school at 16 and go on an apprenticeship and earn their way. Is it right that they, through their taxes, should pay for somebody to go to university who then might be on a six-figure salary? So there's a fairness thing here. There's also an access point. If you want to enable people to fulfil their ambitions and go to university, you have to find a way of sustaining the funding of it. And that's what tuition fees have enabled us to do. And we've actually got more people from disadvantaged backgrounds going to university now as a result of these changes.
Now, you're announcing today that the government is going to end the London Fisheries Convention. For those of us who are perhaps not so well versed in matters of maritime, can you explain what exactly this is all about?
Well, the 1964 London Fisheries Convention basically gave access to a number of European countries, such as France, Belgium and the Netherlands, access to the UK's 6 to 12 mile zone. And we are giving notice that we intend to quit that. It's a provision in the agreement that enables us to do that with a 2-year notice period. And this is important to give us the legal clarity. We're absolutely clear that when we leave the EU, we leave the common fisheries policy, and we will take control for managing fisheries resources in our own waters. That's right out to 200 nautical miles or the halfway point, the median line. And it's very important, therefore, that we left this particular convention to deliver that clarity so that we can negotiate again from first principles.
Now, you might be able to help me out here, because I've been looking through some of the figures. UK vessels caught over 700,000 tonnes of fish last year, a lot of fish. But overseas boats in the strip of sea that this policy is talking about, which is that sort of 6 to 12 miles, they caught just over 10,000 tonnes. So by my maths, you're talking about taking back control of only 1.4% more fish. Am I missing something here?
Yes, because in that particular zone, 6 to 12 mile zone, yes, they catch around 10,000 tonnes of fish. We actually catch very, very little fish in the 6 to 12 mile zone of other European countries. And what we do, it's almost entirely in Ireland. It's a very small amount. But there's a wider...
a very small number of fish you're talking about taking back control of, isn't it?
Yes, but it's in a small area of water, the 6 to 12 zone, and actually having lots of foreign vessels in that 6 to 12 zone does increase competition for our own fishermen. There's also a wider point. In our waters more widely, that's out to 200 miles, actually access for foreign vessels is for around 700,000 tonnes of fish. And there's a huge imbalance here because we only fish about 150,000 tonnes in other people's waters.
Well, I'm sure we'll be hearing much more about this during the Brexit negotiations. George Eustace, thank you very much for your time.
Is the government going to change its policy on public sector pay? The Conservative manifesto stated that the 1% cap on annual pay rises for public sector workers would remain in place until 2020, saving up to $5 billion a year by then. Earlier this week, there were rumblings that the policy would be reviewed before the Treasury weighed in to suggest there had been no change, at least not yet. The new Environment Secretary, Michael Gove, was asked about it on the Andrew Marr Show earlier today.
I was Education Secretary, and I know that the School Teachers Pay Review Body is not the poodle that you depict it as.
Not a poodle, but they work underneath the overall strategy set by the Chancellor, set by the government.
They take account of that, but they also take account of other questions as well, including the number of people who are entering the profession and whether we need to have an increase in pay in order to ensure that we get the very best people in the profession. These pay review bodies have been set up in order to ensure that we can have authoritative advice on what's required in order to ensure that the public services on which we rely are effectively staffed and the people within them are effectively supported. I think we should respect the integrity of that process. I'm not an individual. I am a member of the government and a member of a collective team.
Mr. Gove, so 2 U-turns in one day on this last week. Maybe they'll go for the hat-trick this week. It sounds like they are thinking of ways of loosening up the pay freeze, but Mr. Hammond doesn't want it to come out until this autumn budget.
Well, that's absolutely right. And my understanding is, in fact, the deal is already done. We reported this week, for example, that 20 quite senior Tory MPs went to see the new Chief of Staff, Gavin Barwell, on Wednesday to make it very clear indeed they wouldn't be voting for a budget that allowed the public sector pay freeze to continue. Gavin Barwell told them, fine, we're going to do this, don't worry, we're going to give fresh advice to the public pay review bodies that their parameters have been expanded, and that's how it happened. But crucially, we cannot do it today or even this month because it's a victory for Comrade Corbyn if we do.
And there we see, in a sense, the weakness of 10 Downing Street. They can't direct this policy themselves. They're overruled by Mr. Hammond from number 11. And it only takes about 20 Tory MPs to say, hey, this is what we want. And at the very least, the government's got to listen to them very seriously.
They've got to listen to them and they've got to act, because that is the fragility of the new House of Commons. We saw it last week on another issue. And if you have 20 people saying pay has got to rise in the public sector beyond the cap, pay will rise in the public sector beyond the cap, because they won't be able to get it through the House of Commons. I think there are other issues involved beyond the numerical situation in the Commons. Lots of Tory MPs came back after that election, including, actually, I think Gavin Barwell, who's now in number 10, saying... Who lost his seat, saying, look, teachers and others were saying we can't carry on with the pay restraint for up until 2020. So I think it is going to happen for a combination of reasons.
So what happened to deficit reduction? I would remind you the deficit's actually going to rise this year.
Well, there are a few Tory MPs, but not very many, who feel that it's wrong for the party to capitulate, having made such a point of principle about austerity that it looks very, very weak just to be caving in. But I think Steve's right. This isn't just about, you know, the maths in the House of Commons. Tory MPs are frightened in a way that I have never known them frightened before at the momentum, not with a capital M, behind Jeremy Corbyn at the moment. And there is a real feeling about the Tory brand being really in a very, very difficult place at the moment, where Tories look nasty, there isn't nearly enough sympathy, and it feels politically impossible to stick with the pay limits as they are.
Well, that may be one reason that will keep Tory MPs in line, because if that's true, the last thing they want at the moment is an election. When they say the country doesn't need another election, what they mean is the Tory party doesn't need another election. Isn't that right?
That's completely right. And I think the view is pretty much settled on notwithstanding frenzied speculation in largely Sunday newspapers. The daily newspapers are a lot more responsible about this, I have to
Says a daily newspaper man.
Says a daily newspaper man. But every Tory MP you now meet says, yeah, Theresa, until the end of Brexit, we don't want to open the Pandora's box from now onwards, and that's a very good reason. The problem that still remains, though, is that she does have a lot less authority, which is why you get big beasts left, right and centre, from Michael Gove to Damien Green to Justine Greening this morning, all rattling their own tins for more money. And you have to keep that balance between leading by more consensus and a general free-for-all, which I think we're in slight danger of looking like this morning.
OK, we shall see.